This is the first recording for the class recordings for Primary Math 3 with Singapore Math Live. I want to do three things today. It'll be a little longer recording than usual just because there's the beginning things to do. I want to introduce myself and then talk about a weekly plan for how Singapore Math Live will support you and what you will do on your own for each week. And then, of course, we'll talk about the week one material. My name is Brenda Barnett, and I founded Singapore Math Live this fall. This is 2015, and this is the first year to do Singapore Math Live, but my journey with Singapore Math started back in 2001 when I was homeschooling my children. Before that, I grew up in Tulsa, and then I went to the University of Oklahoma, got a math degree, got out of school and started teaching. Taught for 6.5 years in public high schools, actually all in Texas, and then I began staying home with my children. Eventually they got old enough and I began to school them myself. What I began to notice is I was working with my son back in, my firstborn was a son, and in 2001 when I worked with him, I chose Singapore Math, read some things and kind of went that direction. Didn't obviously know all that I know about it now, but liked what I saw. Somewhere around the time that Blake was in second grade, I was around a group of ladies and we were counting up marriage experience among the group, and everybody kind of rattled off the years they've been married, and I said, wow, we have 127 years of marriage experience right here in this group, and they all laughed and said, oh, Brenda's a math major, she was a math teacher, taught calculus, of course she would add those numbers up in her head. And I thought, I had this moment where I knew that the only reason that I added those numbers up in my head was because I just taught my son second grade math in Singapore Math, and I knew that I was learning something that I never learned myself when I had a math degree. Then there was a day a few years later when my son came to me and he was having trouble with the word problem, and I looked at the word problem and I told him, son, I could write two equations to unknown and solve this with an algebra 2 problem. I have no idea how to solve it with third or fourth grade Singapore Math, and you have to go away and I have to think about this for a while. So eventually I did. I figured out how to do it the Singapore Math way, which is really a beautiful, lovely, simple solution. And so I showed that to him, and we talked about it, and I thought, it's amazing when you're taught to think mathematically instead of just do the work. And I've taught so much about how to do the work, but now understanding the math, the understanding behind the math and the comprehension of it instead of just doing math, comprehending the math was very important to me. And then finally, more recently, as I've been doing some online classes and working on SAT math prep school or classes with students, and my 6th grade daughter was in the room and she was listening in the background as I taught my high school, the SAT prep class, and one day she came to me the next day and she said, Mom, this math problem in my Singapore Math book is the same thing you were doing last night in your class. And I looked at it and she was exactly right. The Singapore Math that I had done, the problems that we had worked in the SAT math was exactly like what she had in her 6th grade Singapore Math book. And that doesn't mean that 6th grade Singapore Math is teaching, trigonometry or too hard of a stuff. What it means is it's teaching you to think mathematically, and the SAT's test, they want to know, can you think mathematically? Can you do math with an understanding attached? And so I just see so many ways that Singapore Math has benefited me, taught me so much, and is such a help to my kids, my children, as they have this math background to really be prepared for what comes next. So maybe you can tell already that I'm a huge fan of Singapore Math, and I've become that over many years of working with it with my own children, and now being given the opportunity to work with parents and help them to use Singapore Math Live as a help to teaching them. So that's who I am and why I love Singapore Math. Let's talk about your weekly plan for what you're going to do for Singapore Math with your child. First thing I hope you've done already is to print the syllabus. It is posted on the website. You have a link, a membership link to the website, and you can get there, print that syllabus. That tells you what you're going to do for weekly assignments. And then the second thing, of course, every week you're going to attend class or watch the recording, depending on what works best for your schedule, either attending or watching the recording, either way. But during this class, I will do several things. I will tell you what's going to be hard this week. what's unusual about the week, what are the problems that are going to throw you, and it'll help you plan your week that way. I'm going to tell you what's essential and what's not. Not necessarily the first week, but eventually there will be things that we do. We say, you know what, there's a lot of problems here, and you could probably leave some things off, because eventually, as kids get older, and maybe you're working with your youngest child and you just have a busy household, you may not be able to accomplish every page in every book, but you can work with these as we go, and I can help you know which ones are essential and which ones you can maybe leave off. And then I'll also help you know how to verbalize the information and how to visualize it. So you can say it to your child, you can draw it for your child, and it helps them to know what to do. Then you will, after you've attended class and know what's going on, you can assign the pages to your student, and you could do that by the day or by the week. On the syllabus that I gave you, I told you what you would do each week. You could take that and say, well, okay, I'm going to break it down into days for my child, or you could take it and just say, you know, however your child needs it. And you can certainly figure that out based on your schedule, based on what days you go to the zoo, or what days you go to grandma's house, or how many days of school you're going to have that week. You can figure that out on your own. And honestly, when I did Singapore math with my children, I did not sit down and teach them before they started every day. I assigned them pages, they started. Singapore math really does flow. It really does make it very, very visual. So I didn't sit down and teach them. I just said, here's the pages to do today. And for the most part, they're able to start out. Maybe when you're switching and you're starting fractions for the first time, maybe there's a little bit of explanation. But for the most part, it really does make it very concrete, very visual, and the students can take it and go without a lot of instruction. They just do the problems. And then, of course, it is important to find time to check the answers on a regular basis. There's not a lot of things that you do every day. They don't do a lot of pages. You do have answer keys, but you need to check those answers, and you need to go over the mistakes before they do the next day's work. And, you know, if sometimes you do it every 2 days, it's okay, as long as you're not, you know, if your student's missing a tremendous amount, it doesn't help to have, you know, perfect practice makes perfect, but just bad practice just doesn't help at all. Of course, as you're doing the problems, if you need help, there are the solutions recordings. In the solutions recordings, I work over every word problem that there is. There's word problems in the intensive practice book. There's word problems in the challenging word problems book. Every one of those word problems is on as a recording that you can click on and look at and go over, and you can put those up for your students, and you can watch them together or watch them on your own or whatever. And then the last thing I would ask you to do, of course, is to make notes of any questions that you have that I don't answer for you in the recording, and send them to me so that I can know more how to help families and what kinds of things you need to know. And I guess with that, let me tell you how you're going to send them to me. You are welcome to call or text me. This is my phone number. Let me try that again. I start writing so fast that I had to go back and slow down. I am in the Central Time Zone, so if you call or text me, it'd be nice if it's reasonable hours in my time zone. The other thing, of course, you could do is simply send me an email, and my email address is very long, but hopefully very easy to remember. It's brenda.barnett@singaporemathlive.com. No spaces, no underscores, just singaporemathlive.com. And that will get to me, and I'll be happy to answer and talk through things as you go. The books that we're working on, we have, actually before I do that, I want to tell you one more story, one more analogy. I think this is very important to my understanding of Singapore math. If you have a baby in your house, or someday you did have a baby in your house, you've seen this process happen. They get to be 10, 11, 12 months, and they're excellent crawlers. They crawl across the floor in lightning fast speed. And then one day they decide they're going to learn how to walk. And so they stand up and they take a step or two and they fall down. But then they stand up and they take a step or two and they fall down. And they stand up and they take a step or two and they fall down. And it's now taken them a minute to go what they could have done in 15 seconds crawling or less. Maybe those are completely wrong numbers. But somehow intuitively that child knows that they need to stop crawling and learn how to walk even though it's slower. I have yet to see a 15-year-old crawling around on all fours because they didn't want to stop and go so slow as to learn to walk. I think mathematically we teach our children to crawl the way that I was taught math, working math problems right to left, lining things up vertically and adding, subtract, multiply, divide in the ways I was taught to do it is really taught me to crawl, and nobody ever asked me to learn to walk mathematically. And sometimes when you're doing math, especially if you're coming from another program, you may look at the way Singapore math teaches it and say, well, that is slow. I'm faster doing it the way I'm doing it now. I want you to see and to help your children to see if that's how they view the math and view the way we're doing the problems in this course. I want them to see and to know that although when you're learning to walk it may feel slower than if you were crawling, in the long run it will be much faster to walk and to do the math the way Singapore math teaches you than to just do it the way you've already been taught. Now, if you never came from another program, if you've been doing Singapore math live or Singapore math all along, you're not going to have problems. But I always say that because invariably there'll be students who say, I don't want to do it that way. This is faster. Remind them of that baby crawling around on the floor who is faster crawling but somehow intuitively knows that they've got to learn to walk. Very, very, very important. Okay, so we have 5 books, but we have 3 books we start with. We have the workbook 3A. It's a B, actually, workbook 3A. We have an intensive practice book 3A, and we have a challenging word problems book 3. Now, both of these are in the U.S. edition, and the challenging word problems they don't make in U.S. editions anymore. It's actually the Common Core edition. I own both. They're almost identical. There are very few changes in the changes in the Common Core edition. They took out a few of the pages here and there, just deleted a couple of pages, and they added some hints. But basically, it's a marketing thing to put the Common Core edition on the cover, and that's fine. But it doesn't change anything about the value or the wonderfulness of the book itself and the word problems that it is. The workbook really is the one that introduces the concept, and the intensive practice is deeper problems, deeper practice, of course, intensive. It goes into more intensive practice, and challenging word problems are just that. They're just word problems, and there's practice, and then there's a challenging section. So it goes easy to hard. I'll just say that when you start out with the word problems, it goes from easy to hard. And so when you're working on your problems during the week and when you're assigning your pages, you just have to kind of keep in mind. So maybe a week would look like this. If you decide you want to script it for your children for what they're doing each day, I picked out week 3 just because in week 3 we have all 3 books, and you might tell your child of the workbook, keep doing that wrong, workbook, and the intensive practice and the challenging word problems. You have 5 days of the week, and if you're going to be home and schooling all 5 days, you might schedule it like this. If you need to leave a day off, you could put things together. Generally speaking, you just kind of look at it and figure it out. There's nothing really magical about it. But you could do 1 exercise a day and this review on Friday. The review pages are longer, the review assignments are longer, so maybe you don't want to have a word problems book on this page, but I just scheduled it out, so I wasn't doing, notice in this particular week, I only had to do 3 books on 1 day. Some weeks that'll work, sometimes not. The rest of the weeks, or the rest of the days, you just have 2 books to do. On the word problems, when you begin a section in the word problems, there are examples, and so I would strongly encourage you to go over those examples in your with your child side by side, and then the rest of the word problems I have worked out for you on the solutions recordings, so those are there. So you could take the information and divide it up however you want to. There's not really a magic way to do it at all. I wouldn't necessarily do all of one book and then all of the next one. It's kind of nice to mix it up because the intensive practice problems do often feel quite hard. The workbook does often feel pretty easy, and so it's kind of nice to have something kind of easy to do every day and something a little harder, and break it up with the word problems. All of those things are something you can kind of figure out and do based on your particular schedule for that particular week, and figure out what's best for you and for your child. All right, moving on to this week. We are in week 1, and according to the syllabus, we're going to work in the workbook exercises 1 through 4. So I have a few notes that I want to go through, and really the primary 3 material is not incredibly difficult. It's a great starting place for Singapore math. So if you've not been in Singapore math before, it's a good place to start because it does not presume a whole lot of information. You missed a little bit of the mental math in second grade, but you can certainly start here and be just fine. And so it probably will not feel very taxing in level 3. And then level 4, if you jumped in there from the beginning, would feel harder, but coming into it from primary 3 will be just that much easier because you've already done some mental math and you know some of that kind of stuff. So let's talk about the stuff you see the first week. One thing is the fact that the place values are very important because that helps with the mental math. The reason it emphasizes place values so much is because of the help with the mental math that it gives, and that's incredibly important. Another thing we do this week is a number theory, and the number theory sounds very impressive, but it just works with thinking skills. So as you're doing something and working on these, you're developing those thinking skills in your child, helping them to begin to learn how to think mathematically. You'll hear me say that a lot. Thinking mathematically is what I'm so impressed with Singapore math. In your book on page 11, just a few things. Again, none of this is really rocket science, but just to make you familiar with the way that it says things. And actually before that, let me go one more thing before I go there. When they're writing words, if you write the word, write out 210 in words, make sure that your child does not use the word and. Mathematically, that's not 210 or 1,200. We don't use the word and because and in math implies a decimal. So 2 and 10 tenths, or 2 and 15 hundredths, we would normally say. Sorry, get my pen together here. When we say the word and, we mean a decimal. At this point in third grade, we're not dealing with decimals at all. So your child will not use the word and. When they're writing, make sure they just write 210, 1,200. Do not use the word and. It's very picky, kind of minor, but as long as we're doing it, let's be precise and make sure that you don't use the word and. Okay, so then on page 11, when you're working with problem 3C, just to make sure that the terminology is clear to you, the digit 5, you look at the number 5,897. The digit 5 stands for 5,000. They're wanting to make sure that when you see this, that they break it down. That 5 stands for 5,000. Okay, and we talk about the value of digit. If you have the number, this number, the value of the 8 is 800. Okay, so either way, we're still saying the same thing. It does that, and then we talk about the places. The other thing is say what is in the ones place is the number 7. Okay, and so all of these things we're just working on breaking it down to know the value of a digit and the place of a digit. And so understanding what is the hundreds place and what is the ones place, what is the value of the digit, those are very simple but very important. All right, again, my goal is even if you haven't thought about things in this way that it's not confusing to you, number 6 on page 13 gives you the digits 1, 0, 3, and 8. And it wants to know the greatest 4-digit number. If you want the greatest 4-digit number, you have to start with the biggest number because you'd rather have 8,000s that's greater than 3,000s. Talk about it in terms they can understand, dollars or candy bars or whatever, toy cars, whatever they're into. I'd rather have 8,000 than 3,000. That'd be the most. And then I need 300 instead of 100. That'd be the most. Then I need 110 instead of 0 10s, and so the smallest number is going to go at the end. If you want to have the greatest 4-digit numbers, you're going to go largest to smallest in the digits. If you want to have the smallest number, and you actually can't have a 4-digit number, well, you can. If you want to do, so this is the largest or the greatest. They actually don't throw this trick at the kids. I'll show you because you're an adult, you can handle it. If you want to do the smallest number, given these numbers, if you have to have 4 digits, you have to start with the 1,000 because you can't have a 0 as a leading number and have a 4-digit number. So in this case, 1038 is the smallest, but when they ask you to do the smallest, it actually does it with different numbers. It doesn't give you a 0 as an option because they don't start that in 3rd grade. Number 7 asks you to find the smallest number of these 4 numbers, so of course 2,567 is the smallest arrangement of those numbers. But we will later add the idea of having a 0 as a coefficient, as one of the numbers, and the fact that you can't have a leading number be a 0. Moving on, page 14. Just to point out a few ways that we do things and make sure that your skills are there. On problem 2b, it asks you, what is 10 less than 600? Now, we're still doing these numbers we can visualize and we can imagine, but what I want you to begin to help your students see is that 600 has 60 tens. Now, we do that with hundreds a lot. We say 600 and then we say 1600, but we don't do that with tens. If you think of this as being 60 tens, then if you have 10 less than that, you must have 59 tens. And so, although they can answer the question without thinking about it this way, it's a good time to introduce the idea, especially if they get stuck on any of this, that we have 59 tens and we can make that work. It's the same thing if you go on to page 15 and you look at page, yeah, you can even look at I put down, let's see, lots of places you look at. Let's look at 4G, for example. Let's look at that one. On 4G, it says 4,050 minus what is 3,950. Okay, if it takes them a while to transfer between the thousands and such, if you tell them this is 405 tens, and now I have 395 tens, then what did I lose? I lost 10 tens. From 405 to 395, and I actually maybe should have done it the other way. Then you can say, wait a minute, we have 40 hundreds and 50 and 39 hundreds and 50, and so therefore we lost 100. The fact that it works, if you look at it in hundreds or tens, either one, or certainly in ones, but helping your child to look at these numbers and break them down and see them in the different ways. Now, your child may already be intuitive with it, but if they struggle at all, especially with breaking from the 4,000s to the 3,000s, helping them see that this is 40 tens and 50, and you're going to 39 tens and 50. I'm sorry, I'm saying it backwards. These are hundreds. 40 hundreds and 50 and 39 hundreds and 50. So what you're getting rid of is 100 to go from one number to the next. That same line of thinking can be used on 16 part D. Where you're finding a pattern if you identify the thing that is the same. The only thing that is the same on all of these is that they have an 8 at the end. So that means I have 370 tens, 368 tens, 367 tens. So what I'm missing here is 369 tens and the 8 that stays the same for each of them. Helping them learning to think about this as a pattern is going to be very helpful. Now, that's all of the material we cover really in the workbook pages. So then let's look at a couple of things in the intensive practice. In the intensive practice, when you get to the word problems, I work all of those for you on the solutions recording, but there's a few things we could talk about in just the regular problems part before we get to there. Again, same kind of an idea. Page 2, number 4, part C. We talk about the number 6,045, and the question is, how many hundreds are there in that number? Okay, they're not asking what is in the hundreds place, they're asking the fact that there are 60 hundreds. Now, there's also 45, but they're not asking about those 45 ones. There are 60 hundreds in this number, and so they're beginning to help us see exactly what we're doing with that. Also, same thing on the next page, 9A, says how many tens are there in 460. We want to know that there are 46 tens in 460. All of those play together and help us to begin thinking about numbers in that way. Again, I came a little sooner than I remembered. Number 11, we're on page 4 in this book. Number 11 has the digits 7, 0, 8, and 4, and it wants to know the greatest number, and the greatest 4-digit number, and the smallest 4-digit number, the greatest 3-digit number, and the smallest 3-digit number. I'm abbreviating mine. It's written out if you're looking at your book. Hopefully you're looking at your book. To find the greatest 4-digit numbers, you're going to use all 4 of the digits, and you're going to put them in order from greatest to smallest. Remember, if you're finding the smallest 4-digit number and you can't start with a 0, then you have to start with the next smallest and go back to the 0 and go smallest to greatest with that one little fix. And of course, if you go down to 3 digits, you're not limited so much. Oops, 407 would be smaller than 408, and it works that way. But you see, this is kind of that number theory where you're just working on solving things and working on seeing how it works out, thinking about numbers not just as a big number, but as individual parts. How many thousands, how many hundreds, on like that. The problems we're working on in the word problems, I'll let you look at the recording, the solutions recording for any of those that you need to see. And this week starts off pretty easy. There's no word problems. It's a pretty small set of assignments to do, and so that's all that we need to cover for our class time today. If you do have questions, get with me and let me know, and I'll be back with you next week for week 2.